We brought you damn good beer first, and now we've got damn good beef. Castle Cattle Company is the absolute best source for farm-to-table Wagyu beef in the country. Hassel Cattle Company is a fourth-generation cattle farm out of Texas. They ship all over the states, and they ship it straight to your door. Why do they call their beef the blue-collar Wagyu? Because it's the best damn Wagyu that every man or woman can afford. You got to check it out. I've already made 2 orders from Hassel Cattle Company. It is incredibly high-quality meat, and the speed in which they get it straight to your door is really impressive. So check them out and use the code DNVR10 for 10% off your order. That's HASSELL cattlecompany.com.
One and only DNVR to the top, to that makes arcade bar. Brief mystery in that old trophy case. I'm forward to waiting for. Well, bring on the shade. I feel in my Broncos in his arms. Like a whole wreck crew and a friendly orange and blue to the end. Come join us, DNVR. We are DNVR.
Welcome into the DNVR Broncos podcast. I think our record player is a little warped there.
Did you guys ever see Apollo 13?
I can't say I have.
Okay, well, there's a scene in there where they're, of course, they're in space and they're trying to get home, and they play music on a tape recorder, and at the end you use a tape recorder tape player so often the batteries die, and that's the way it sounded. You hear like Hank Williams Sr., and it sounded like Pleasure Horse with our theme as the batteries are going out, and then
let's hope our batteries aren't going out.
Oh, they better not. We just started the off season.
My batteries have been out for months. Anyways, welcome into the DNVR Broncos podcast presented by MSU Denver Online. Check them out, msudenver.edu/online to scope out all they have to offer. 750 total classes. They've got 40-plus hybrid programs, rigorous and affordable programs taught by professors who bring the real world into the classroom. If you're looking to further your education, but you don't have so much time on your hands and you're working a full-time job, MSU Denver students work twice as many hours as students attending any other Colorado institution. So check them out, msudenver.edu/online.
My boys, what's going on? GM Search 2021 continuing today, guys. George Paton's here. He's not here. What does this all mean?
And that is the question. As you kind of wake up this morning and get the news that George Paton has returned to Minnesota, you are left to read the tea leaves. And I got to be honest, guys, rarely is this a good thing for any type of situation, whether you're signing a free agent or whether you're signing a coach or whether it's a GM. Usually when you have the guy and they want to be the guy, they don't go anywhere. They stay around and you get it done. Now, that doesn't mean that has to be the situation here where the Broncos aren't old, Payton isn't old. But if we're being honest, that's my first reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very fair. This could mean so many things. It could mean the Broncos want to explore other options, which probably means they may not love him. It means he may want to explore other options, which means right now he may not love them. And there's also the case that, guys, once these two leave each other, that they realize what they had in the other one and that a deal could get done in a matter of hours today. Maybe they just wanted to sleep on it, but sometimes the team will keep that person in town for that night in order to sleep on it. Maybe with COVID restrictions, though, that's not allowed or it's not looked up upon. So maybe all of those things play into it. And guys, it could also be a negotiating tactic for either side. It could be George Paton saying, yeah, you're only offering me 4 years, $20 million. I kind of want that 6 years, $30 million. I'm going to go and see if you come running back.
Well, you've got the Lions in play for George Paton. They interviewed him last week. And of course, the connection there is that deeply involved in the interview process in Detroit as a consultant to Sheila Ford Hamp, the new owner inheriting the team from Martha Firestone Ford, is Chris Spielman, who is the brother of Rick Spielman. And Rick Spielman has been George Paton's boss both in Minnesota and for most of his time in Miami. So really, Rick Spielman has called George Paton his right-hand man over the years, and certainly the title that Paton has had there has reflected it. So if he's in the mix in Detroit and you have a Spielman involved with that, that's the kind of thing that's lingering over this. You mentioned COVID, Zach. The thing is, when they have the introductory press conference for whichever GM the Broncos hire, it's not like the GM has to be there on site, right?
Correct.
Yeah, usually, let's say you sleep on it for a night and then you make the move the next day and you have the press conference right after. Ordinarily, you do it right there in the auditorium. Well, George Paton, if he's the guy, he can do the press conference sitting right there at his home in Minnesota. So you don't have that logistical thing in play. And then, of course, there's the Terry Fontenot factor. What if Fontenot became the leader in the clubhouse? And then, of course, the interesting thing there, they can't bring Fontenot in person because of COVID restrictions. And he, kind of like George Paton, has another iron in the fire. He's apparently, according to Adam Schefter, one of the leaders potentially in Atlanta for that job. So it's muddled here right now at best.
Yeah, and there's so many different things at play here, and one of them is, while I agree with the decision, that the organization made for John Elway to kind of step away from this GM role. It definitely wasn't great timing in a year where everyone's looking for a GM, it seems like. And so now you're in this kind of cat and mouse game with your candidates. And I guess the best situation for the Broncos would be they were blown away by Terry Fontenot in their second interview. They already had the second interview in person scheduled with George Paton. They were kind of hoping he would steal the show. He didn't do it. They were left caught in between and said, we'll let you know. And if you're on George Paton's side of things and you heard the we'll let you know and you got on a flight, you don't feel great about your chances. But for the Broncos, if you've set your sights on Terry Fontenot, well, then you should try to get that done as fast as possible because obviously he's a candidate other place. And the other way it could go is, the Broncos pulled out a contract and said, all right, what do you think? And he said, I'll let you know. And, in that case, in the Broncos, then you don't feel great about it. I'm curious which one you guys think is more likely.
Well, Ryan, I have a question for you really quick when we talk about this, because I'm very curious where you stand. You said if you were hiring someone to be in a big position like general manager, you would want that in-person interview. And I don't think really anyone would argue with that. But in today's COVID world, with the restrictions that are there, where Terry Fontenot can't travel to Denver right now, he may be able to do it in 6 days. He may not be able to do it until like 3 weeks from now. What do you do if you're the Broncos? If, let's say, the Broncos were the ones that told George Paton, we'll let you know, because they were so blown away by Terry Fontenot's second interview yesterday morning. What should the Broncos do if Terry Fontenot is their guy? Do they offer him a contract today, especially because the Atlanta Falcons, he's a front runner for them? Or do they just let it play out? And maybe that's why they're keeping Champ Kelly's name still kind of burning on the fire in case they're not able to get Terry Fontenot in 2 weeks from now. And George Paton has already signed with the Detroit Lions or decided to stay in Minnesota. And then he's kind of their back burner guy that they fall back on.
It's a tough decision. It really is. But in the end, what's most important is getting your guy here. And while you have a preference and while you want to have, the luxury of meeting in person and doing all that, and like I said yesterday, I would want to do that. But in the end, this isn't like a head coach where if it doesn't work out in 2 or 3 years, you just want to go back to the well. It could be like that, but you really, really don't want to do that. And so to me, if you believe Terry Fontenot is the best candidate, and that's what your gut is telling you at this point, despite the fact that you haven't been able to meet him in person, just offer him the job and get it done and move forward. I just don't think you can sit back and wait, because the door is open for so many different things the longer you wait. Obviously, he's a candidate in other places. You want to get this thing done.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. If he's your guy, you make it happen, even if you can't wait for him to have an in-person interview. And also, this isn't like you're on careerbuilder.com and a resume comes across and then you have 2 virtual interviews with the person. No, there's a ton of background research that's done on these guys. He's been in the league for 16 years. You can get enough information about him from other people to make sure that, this isn't just a rando showing up. And of course, Terry Fontenot's not a random person showing up here. So you do have more background research than just a normal interview situation.
Yeah, I'm curious, Mace. What do you think about the Paton situation? What do you think is more likely? He didn't sign the contract. The Broncos didn't put it on his desk.
I think they didn't put it on his desk. I think they wanted to sit back and wait. I mean, I think this is one of those things where maybe the simplest explanation is probably the most logical one and probably the most likely one, that they wanted to sit back and wait, and there's really no point to him hanging around and while they deliberate. And you think back to when they were going through the coach process, they went and flew to meet with each coaching candidate in person. And then they came back to Denver, slept on it, and made their decision, and then offered Vic Fangio the job. I think they're just kind of in the decision-making process, sleep on it, talk about it today, and then go from there. I mean, I know there's the whole thing of, you don't want to let the guy leave the building, sort of like in free agency, but I think we're dealing with a different environment here right now. So I think they just wanted to kind of take the night, find where things go tomorrow. But I think also George Paton he probably wants to hear more from Detroit in particular. I think that's the other thing that's in play.
And Mace, I'm with you. I think the Broncos did not put an offer down for him yesterday. And the Broncos right now can view themselves as the one in the position of strength. Look, they're kind of down to 2 candidates right now. Whereas the Lions, they still have like 6 names floating out there. So it's not like George Paton's the one with the upper hand here saying he's one of 2 finalists for the Lions. Now, he could easily become that today, tomorrow, in the next 24, 48 hours. So my question to you guys is, how long, let's say the Broncos did like George Paton and were impressed with him, were impressed with Terry Fontenot, and they're kind of neck and neck right now. How long do you wait? Because Terry Fontenot could be offered the job today. Same with George Paton from the Atlanta Falcons and the Detroit Lions. How long do you wait and mull this over to make sure that it's the right decision?
I mean, if you're waiting, see, I think if you're going to push this thing back, because for whatever reason you're not worried about one of these candidates getting swooped up, then you wait and see what happens in the playoff games this weekend, and see if you become Brady fans for the first times in your lives, probably, and see if you can end up getting Terry Fontenot in person next week.
But what are you going to learn in person, though, that maybe you didn't learn over a second Zoom call? That's the thing I kind of wonder here about is is it worth kind of putting all the chips on that table, knowing that there might be a better situation in play? I mean, if you kind of sit back and evaluate the situations of Atlanta and Denver, and Fontenot's in the mix in Atlanta, I mean, I know Broncos fans aren't going to want to hear this, but Atlanta's probably the better job across the board.
What makes you say that?
What makes me say that? You have an established quarterback in place. He either has value to you as an asset on your team or value to you as a tradable asset. You are in a division where the other quarterbacks are either placeholders like Teddy Bridgewater in Carolina, or they're old. Tom Brady's 43, Drew Brees is 41. In other words, you have the ability to look around and say, all right, we make a few tweaks here, then we're right back in long-term contention and maybe even in position to have long-term dominance in the division, where that just doesn't exist in the AFC West right now for the Broncos.
So
and
then,
the owner, and then ownership too. You know who your owner is going to be 12, 16 months from now. You know it's going to be Arthur Blank, and you know that it's basically a bottomless pool of resources there with Arthur Blank.
So then a similar question, just looking at this from George Paton's eyes, what's a more appealing job, the Denver Broncos or the Detroit Lions? And kind of, I can see a lot of similarities between the Lions, where they stand with the rest of their division and tradable asset in a quarterback with Matthew Stafford, and also with the Falcons. So would you also say that the Lions are more appealing?
The one reason why I would say they're not more appealing is that there is zero track record of success with the Detroit Lions in the last 3 decades. The Falcons at least have proven under Arthur Blank that they can build and build quickly. I mean, Blank has been on the job, has been owning the team since, I believe, 2003, and they've microwaved themselves into being a division winner now 3 separate times under 3 separate coaches under Arthur Blank. They did it with Jim Elmore back in 2004, with Mike Smith in 2008 when they drafted Matt Ryan, and then again with Dan Quinn and Kyle Shanahan as the OC in 2015, 2016. So there's a proven track record that they can turn it around quickly with that ownership, and that they can have everything they need to kind of keep it together and build on that. So I think that's why you say, okay, Atlanta could be the better job, but in no way are you saying Detroit is the better job just because they have Stafford, because there are some things that are institutional with the Lions.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense, Mace. And another thing that we haven't talked about yet in this is, how appealing is it for a general manager to A, have their pick of a head coach right when they come in, or B, have stability at head coach when they come in, so they don't have to start from scratch? I mean, which one is more appealing? Because I think initially you would say, oh, well, of course the guy wants to come in and be able to pick his own head coach. But on the other hand, if you're kind of starting from scratch, not just with the Broncos, but with any organization, you're going to have to build your personnel department. And then if you also have to build a coaching staff starting from the top, that may be just so much work and so much pressure that very first year.
Yeah, that's a lot on your plate. I mean, you get brought in, and then you're instantly, vaulted into a head coach search. I think what I would hope the Broncos would be saying, and again, it's the awkward situation where Vic Fangio goes to the bathroom and they're whispering, but it's, hey, if it doesn't work out, you can go get your guy after next year. And that to me almost sounds more appealing. You come into a place, you have a year to get your side of things figured out, to get your people in place, to have an eye on everything that's going on, and then make your evaluation, rather than coming in and instantly going into a head coach search. That is a lot to put on your plate.
Also,
There's one thing. If you have a head coach search right now, if that head coach doesn't work out, you probably get another swing at the head coach down the line. Whereas if you inherit a head coach and then it doesn't work out and you make a change a year from now, you probably only get that one swing on having your own head coach, because if that head coach doesn't work out 3 years down the line, that means you're a GM in year 4. You haven't turned it around. They're probably replacing you.
On the flip side, though, doesn't it take so much of the pressure off of you this year as a general manager? And I know GMs probably want the pressure on them. I mean, that's why they're getting this job. But if the head coach doesn't work out, you can fire him. And then this year wasn't really on you because you didn't hire him. You were just kind of seeing the process through with the team, getting an evaluation, and then your evaluation starts the next year. And also same thing with the draft. And regardless on if a GM hires a head coach or not, this draft, the GM could easily write this draft off if it turns out to be a bad one, that it wasn't necessarily their fault. And there is a lot of fairness to that. They're only going to be here for about 25% of the draft evaluation process from now until April. The next draft, 2022 draft, for all the teams hiring general managers right now, that'll really be their first draft where they've been fully in control with their guys.
There's a lot of different ways you can look at it, and I thought it was interesting yesterday that James Palmer had a report in which he said the Broncos GM vacancy is one that is coveted. It is, he said around the league it's viewed as a good job, and I think the fact that George Paton, who has declined job after job during his time in Minnesota, has reached this far down the line tells you that there is something that's attractive about the Broncos job. James Palmer said, it's a young, talented roster, which is definitely true. And then he had an interesting comment about the quarterback situation that I think is up to interpretation. That it's a young quarterback situation, not a lot of money tied up. And I'm curious if you guys heard that and if you have had time to determine your interpretation of what that meant.
Yeah, I that was the thing that jumped out most about what James Palmer said, was the not having a lot of money tied up, which basically told me, all right, that means one of two things. It means because you have the cost controlled quarterback drink, that means you have flexibility to do other things on the roster, but it also means that presumably you can choose to change that. You can bring in somebody. Basically, when you have having Drew Lock as a second round cost control quarterback means that you're not married to him. If you look at the landscape and say, I really want someone else, and I want someone else right now, you have the ability to go do that, whether it's a veteran, whether it's somebody in the draft, or whether, and I mean a veteran like a Matthew Stafford, or even the hedge type of situation. And that's something. And Peyton has actually been a part of doing the hedge before, way back in 2008 when he and Rick Spielman had Travaris Jackson, another second round pick, and they brought in Gus Frerotte, who played a couple of years for the Broncos as a hedge, and they end up turning it to Gus Frerotte. The Vikings go 8-3 with Gus Frerotte starting and end up winning the division for the first time in 8 years.
Yeah. To me, what this says is all options are on the table. If you want to build the defense and ride with Vic and go with Drew Lock, you can do that. If you want a first round pick as your quarterback, you can do that. If you want to bring in a Matthew Stafford or a hedge, you can do whatever you want. And isn't that probably what a GM wants to hear more than anything else, is you get to do whatever you want at the quarterback position? I mean, that's probably the biggest selling point for any GM. Instead of being told, okay, we're forcing quarterback X down your throat, unless it's, a Patrick Mahomes, who any GM would be happy to be forced down their throat. They probably want a big say in the quarterback. So to me, that's a huge selling point for the Broncos.
Yeah, I think that has to be it. And, some people have said, oh, that means you can get rid of Drew Lock quickly. And other people have said, oh, that means, that Drew Lock has a better reputation around the league than you might think. I think it's either, right, depends on the candidate's interpretation of the position and how Drew Lock did and how he's trending up. All options are on the table, and I'm sure you guys saw the little graph that came out the other day, which was like winning percentage versus salary cap commitments for next season. And there was 4 quadrants, and the bottom right quadrant was like the best one. The Broncos were in, the corner of that one, meaning they're closer to the middle, but they were in the better quadrant because their salary cap situation is good. And you could honestly have a situation where a GM comes in and you could say, hey, look, you get to make the decision on Von Miller. You could free up a bunch of money there. You get to make the decision on a bunch of guys, and you get to make the decision on the quarterback. And I don't think this should be completely set aside, although it's not going to be the deciding factor. And you get to live in Denver, in Colorado. That plays a role. When people are deciding where they want to make their career and make their life and move their family. So there's a lot at play. That one is probably the least, but it does make a difference. And I think that a GM can look at this and say, I'm going to have a lot of control over what happens here. I'm not tied into a lot of things.
And that is huge, especially when it comes down to these two guys, especially when we're talking about George Paton, guys, because one of the things that we haven't talked about yet is how picky George Paton has been over his career, not just last year with the Browns, but he's had a lot of interest in the past couple of years to become a next general manager. And I think he even had an in-person interview with the Browns last year, was the favorite to land the job, and then backed out. So that could be a reason why you would point to George Paton and say he was the one that decided to go home to Minnesota yesterday, although every report has indicated that he is ready to take a general manager position. Maybe that's something that's playing into this as well, is he wants to make sure that he gets the best job for himself, since he knows he can just go back to Minnesota and be another assistant general manager for another year until another team is interested in him in next year.
Well, the thing is, like with Vikings fans, they've kind of gotten used to George Paton's name circulating and then George Paton pulling himself out of consideration. This is something that's actually gone on a few times over the last few years, not just last year with the Cleveland Browns. And part of it may be that, hey, you pull your name out, and then you're turning them down. They're not turning you down. But part of it is also that he has a tremendous partnership with Rick Spielman there. And you don't work with somebody as their right-hand person for so long. They've been together in Minnesota now 14 years, and they worked together in Miami before that. You don't have that unless there's really a kind of a special bond between the two of you, a good chemistry. And Paton kind of has to weigh that. Maybe he's got a situation where he's got an ideal thing at work, and maybe his family loves Minnesota as well. I mean, there could be personal considerations as well going on with this. These are things that we don't necessarily know. So it's not as simple as, oh, this is a good job, you should take it. There can be other considerations that weigh on Paton's mind too.
And you know what? If George Paton is the guy, or let's say it's Terry Fontenot, and he was the one, maybe the Broncos have made an offer to him, but he wants to explore other options with Atlanta. You know what you do? You lay down $36 million in 6 years, and that'll probably sway his family to come to Denver, or whatever hesitations there are. He probably won't take that second interview in Detroit if you do something like that.
Yeah, and those big, long contracts are starting to become more of the norm when it comes to general managers. So that could be the situation here as well. And
Exactly.
that definitely gives you two additional swings on the head coach position if you're on a 6-year contract. Or not definitely, but likely. And maybe that's where they're at. They know that, you go to a place where the head coach situation isn't stable and neither is the quarterback situation. Well, the chances are you aren't going to get both right on your first swing.
The other thing is that with potential new ownership, if you end up getting a 6-year contract, that means if the team is sold in the next 16 months, then whoever that owner is, even if the owner wants their own general manager in there, could look at that contract and see, whoa, I'm paying this guy $30 million not to work here. Ugh, I may be a billionaire, but I didn't get to be a multi-billionaire by burning $30 million just so I could have somebody else. So I'm gonna ride or die with this GM that I'm inheriting.
Yeah, that's pretty good stability for a general manager to ask all these questions about ownership, which are fair questions, and then to just say, "Oh, okay. Well, when the new owner comes in, I still have 5 years, $30 million left on my contract. I feel pretty good."
I mean, shoot, if it were any of us, even if it were, we're interviewing for a lower level position, I mean, they'd say, you have any questions? And yeah, I'd say, hey, who's going to own this team in 14 months? What's that going to look like? If people like us would ask that question, the general manager is going to bring it up because the GM and the owner are going to basically kind of have a hotline to each other, whoever that owner turns out to be.
Yeah. And they can tell them, look, worst case scenario is you're getting paid to do nothing.
Not too bad.
Last thing I want from you guys is just, where you stand now. Make your call. And Mace, I'll start with you. Who ends up being the next general manager of the Denver Broncos?
Oh, man, put me on the spot right there.
You can change this tomorrow if they haven't made it higher.
I think it's still going to circle back to Paton, that all sides are going to think about it, and he'll end up being the guy.
And I'm going to say George Paton as well. I'm going to say this thing gets done in the next 36 hours.
All right. I'll once again be the different one here. I'm going to say it ends up being Fontenot. I think that maybe there was a little extra intrigue there than the Broncos thought. Or, I think yesterday it was clear that Paton was the leader. And feels as if maybe something has changed. So if that's the case, then it's got to be Fontenot who they want to wait on.
So I have to ask you, how long are they waiting? When does this thing get done? Does an in-person interview happen, or does he get hired before this weekend?
I think they go third Zoom interview, and it gets done after that.
So this week?
Yeah.
Yep. I just, man, and I know the Broncos aren't rushing it right now, because if they were rushing it, they could have made a decision over the weekend or yesterday or Monday. But I just have a hard time seeing this thing go into late next week.
Yeah, it's definitely not ideal, and I don't think the Broncos want that or anyone wants that. So we'll keep an eye on it. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being Paton and it ends up getting done today. After a conversation with his wife or whatever it may be. So we will obviously have an eye on it, and we will be talking more about this on the podcast side of things.
Before we move on, I know one person brought up in the comments, there is a report out of Detroit saying that the Lions are actually zeroing in on Kevin Colbert, who is the Steelers GM. They'd probably have to give a little compensation, but that may reduce Peyton's options a little bit.
Interesting. Well, again, we'll have an eye on it, and we are going to jump over to the podcast side of things where we'll talk more about this. If you want to listen, you can download the DNVR Broncos podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. And if you want to have your questions read on the podcast, you can subscribe to thednvr.com and leave your comments in the comment section where we read them every day. But for now, on the live side, that wraps it up for us, and we will talk to you soon.